The mansion door burst open with a loud crash. Daniel Carvalho dropped the leather briefcase onto the marble floor, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just listened to his son's last voice message. The trembling voice of Lucas, only 7 years old, still echoed in his ears like a cry for help that pierced his soul. "Dad, please, it's very cold." He ran up the stairs 2 steps at a time, his tie loosened, cold sweat running down his forehead despite the air conditioning. His hands were shaking. He had never felt so much fear in his life. Not when he closed his first $1 million contract. Not when he almost lost everything in the crisis. This was a different kind of terror. Primitive. Visceral. He found Lucas in the living room, sitting on the gray velvet sofa, completely motionless. His clothes clung to his small body, dripping water onto the Persian rug that had cost a fortune. The boy's lips were purplish. His skin, pale as paper. His glassy eyes fixed on nothing. Daniel felt his legs give way. "Lucas." He ran to his son, kneeling in front of him. He touched the child's icy face. "My God, you're freezing." The boy moved slowly, as if every movement hurt. His eyes met his father's. And then something inside him broke. Tears ran down his wet face as the small body began to shake violently. She didn't let me come in, Dad." His voice was a hoarse whisper, broken by sobs. "I stayed out there, in the rain, for hours." Rage exploded inside Daniel like a volcano. But he forced himself to stay calm. His son needed him now. He needed care, not shouting. "Where is she?" Daniel asked, taking off his own suit jacket and wrapping it around the boy's trembling body. "In her bedroom." Lucas shivered even more, his teeth chattering. "She said I deserved it, for forgetting to close the gate." Daniel picked up his son. The boy weighed almost nothing. He had always been small for his age. Delicate. Too gentle for this cruel world. And he, Daniel, had failed to protect him. He had been so focused on expanding his businesses, on closing more contracts, on adding more zeros to his bank account, that he hadn't noticed what was happening inside his own home. The messages. He had received 7 voice messages throughout the afternoon. He was in an important meeting. He put the phone on silent. Ignored the notifications. When he finally listened, his blood ran cold. The first message was at 2 in the afternoon. Lucas asking to come in. His voice still calm, just confused. The second, half an hour later. The boy started to cry. He said it was raining. The third. Fourth. Fifth. The desperation growing in each one. The voice getting weaker. More frightened. The 6th message had only crying. Broken sobs and the sound of the rain pounding hard. The 7th and last was the one that made him drop everything and run home like a madman, driving at 200 kilometers per hour. "Dad. I can't feel my fingers anymore. Help me." He carried Lucas to the bathroom. Turned on the shower. Lukewarm water, not hot. He knew that warming the body too quickly could be dangerous. He carefully removed the boy's soaked clothes. The school uniform shirt stuck to his skin. The socks leaving red marks on his swollen ankles. Lucas cried softly as the lukewarm water fell over him. "I'm sorry, Dad. Sorry for forgetting the gate." No, Daniel held his son's face firmly, but gently. He looked into the brown eyes full of tears. "You're not to blame for anything. Do you understand? None of this is your fault." He wrapped the boy in soft towels. Took him to his own bedroom. Dressed him in a warm pajama. Covered him with 3 blankets. Lucas was still trembling, but less now. Color was slowly beginning to return to his lips. Daniel picked up the phone. He called emergency services. He described the situation in a controlled voice, despite the storm raging inside him. The operator said she was sending an ambulance immediately. She talked about hypothermia. About risks. About how he had done everything right so far. While he waited, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, holding his son's small, still cold hand. Lucas struggled to keep his eyes open. "You're not going to let her do this again, right, Dad?" the boy whispered, his voice thick with exhaustion and fear. The question shattered Daniel's heart into 1,000 pieces. Because the painful truth was that he didn't know. He didn't know how long this had been happening. He didn't know how many other times Helena had punished Lucas this way. He didn't know how many cries for help from his son he had ignored because he was too busy building an empire. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Leave a comment saying what you thought and which city or country you're watching from. The ambulance siren sounded outside, but Daniel barely heard it. He was looking at his son, at that fragile boy who trusted him completely, and making a silent promise. Never again. Never again would he fail to protect him. The paramedics went up the stairs carrying equipment. Daniel guided them to the bedroom, each step heavy as lead. He watched in silence as they checked Lucas's vital signs. The machine beeped at a rhythm that seemed far too slow. The body temperature was still dangerously low. "We need to take him to the hospital immediately," said the older paramedic, a woman with kind eyes who touched Daniel's shoulder with understanding. "You did the right thing by warming him gradually. You probably saved his life." Saved his life. The words echoed in Daniel's mind like a punch to the stomach. His son had been so close. So close to. He couldn't even finish the thought. He followed the stretcher to the ambulance. Lucas held his hand tightly, his eyes wide with fear at seeing all those strangers around him. "Dad, don't leave me alone." "Never." Daniel climbed into the ambulance with him. "I'll be here the whole time." It was only when the doors closed that he saw Helena. Standing on the mansion's porch, arms crossed, her face a mask of irritation. Not a drop of concern. Not a trace of guilt. Just that expression he knew so well. The same one she used when she complained that Lucas had left toys scattered around. Or when the boy spilled juice by accident. As if all of this were just an inconvenience. The ambulance pulled away. Daniel looked away, focusing on his son. Lucas needed him now. The rest would come later. At the hospital, while doctors examined Lucas, Daniel finally had time to think. To truly process everything. He sat in the empty waiting room, head in his hands, and let reality hit him like an avalanche. Helena had entered their lives 2 years earlier. 6 months after the death of Camila, Lucas's mother. Daniel had been lost back then. Drowning in work and pain. Helena had seemed perfect. Polite. Elegant. She knew exactly what to say. How to behave at business dinners. How to impress important clients. They married too quickly. Daniel knew that now. He was trying to fill a void. Trying to give Lucas a maternal figure. Trying to rebuild something that looked like a family. But Lucas changed. Little by little. So gradually that Daniel didn't notice until it was too late. The boy who used to run to hug him when he got home started to grow quiet. Withdrawn. He began to eat less. Talk less. Smile less. Daniel attributed everything to grief. To the process of adjustment. He never imagined that. "Mr. Carvalho?" A young doctor approached, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Lucas is stable. It was close, but he's going to be fine. We want to keep him under observation tonight." Relief almost knocked him out of the chair. "Can I see him?" "Of course. But I need to inform you of something." The doctor hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We found other marks on his body. Bruises at different stages of healing. Scratches. Small burns that look like cigarette burns." Daniel felt the blood freeze in his veins. "By law, we are required to report cases like this to Child Protective Services. They will want to speak with you. And with Lucas. To understand what has been happening." Cigarettes. Helena smoked. In secret, because she knew Daniel hated it. She said she had quit, but he sometimes smelled it on her clothes. She had used that on his son. On her own stepson. A 7-year-old child. He entered the room where Lucas was. The boy looked tiny in that hospital bed, connected to wires and machines. But his eyes lit up when he saw his father. A small fragile smile appeared on his pale face. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, champ." Daniel sat beside the bed, holding his son's hand. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Lucas looked at his own fingers. "I can feel them again." They stayed silent for a moment. Daniel knew he had to ask. He needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "Lucas." He took a deep breath. "Those marks on your body. The doctor told me. Who did that? The boy stiffened. His eyes instantly filled with tears. She said if I told, it would be worse. The anger Daniel felt was something he had never experienced before. It wasn't the explosive anger of a moment. It was something deep, cold, calculated. Helena had hurt his son. Repeatedly. Systematically. And she still had the audacity to threaten him into silence. It's not going to be worse. Daniel squeezed his son's hand gently. I promise you. She will never lay a finger on you again. Never again. But she said, Lucas sobbed, she said you would get mad at me. That it was all my fault for being clumsy. For forgetting things. For not being good enough. Each word was a stab in Daniel's heart. Helena had destroyed that boy's self-esteem. She had made Lucas believe he deserved that cruelty. Look at me. Daniel held his son's face, wiping away the tears with his thumb. None of that is true. You are perfect exactly the way you are. And I should have noticed. I should have paid more attention. This is my fault, not yours. Lucas threw himself into his father's arms, crying. Daniel held him, feeling the small body shake against his. But this time it wasn't from the cold. It was relief. It was pain finally being released. It was a terrible secret that no longer had to be carried alone. I'm so scared of her, Dad. The boy whispered against his chest. She's so different when you're not around. Daniel closed his eyes, fighting his own tears. I know, son. I know. But it's over. All of this is over now. And as he held Lucas, feeling the boy's heart beating against his own, Daniel made a decision. Lucas finally fell asleep around 11 at night. Daniel stayed watching his son's chest rise and fall in a calm rhythm, each breath a guarantee that he was alive. He was safe. At least for now. He left the room quietly and called Roberto, his personal lawyer for 15 years. It didn't matter that it was almost midnight. This couldn't wait. Daniel? What a surprise. I thought you were in Paris closing the contract with. I cancelled everything, Daniel interrupted, his voice low but firm. I need you at the hospital now. It's about Lucas. And Helena. There was a pause. Roberto knew Daniel well enough to sense when something was seriously wrong. I'm on my way. 40 minutes later, the two were in an empty conference room at the hospital. Daniel told him everything. Every detail. Every voice message still saved on his phone. The marks on Lucas's body. The threats. The fear in his son's eyes when mentioning his stepmother. Roberto took notes, his face growing more serious by the minute. When Daniel finished, the lawyer took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. This is serious, Daniel. Very serious. We're talking about documented child abuse. The hospital has already contacted Child Protective Services. There will be a formal investigation. I know. Daniel crossed his arms. And I want her to pay for everything she did. She will pay. The medical evidence alone is devastating. Roberto leaned forward. But I need to ask you something important. How did you not notice? 2 years, Daniel. She had access to your son for 2 years. The question hurt more than any accusation could. Because it was true. Because Daniel had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times over the past few hours. I was blind, he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. Too focused on work. Trusting her too much. Thinking Lucas was just processing his mother's death. I was an idiot. No, Roberto shook his head. You were manipulated. Just like Lucas. Abusers are experts at that. At creating perfect facades. At isolating their victims. Daniel thought of all the times Helena had convinced him he was overreacting. All the times she had a perfectly reasonable explanation for Lucas's behavior. How she always seemed so concerned, so devoted, in front of other people. She's an actress, Roberto said, as if reading his thoughts. And a good one. But now the show is over. They spent the night planning. Roberto would file a protective injunction first thing in the morning. Helena would be barred from getting near Lucas. The mansion's security cameras would be seized as evidence. Witnesses would be questioned. Employees. Teachers. Anyone who had contact with the family. There's something else, Daniel said, hesitating. I want full custody. I want guarantees that she will never have access to my son again. We'll get that, Roberto assured him. With the evidence we have, no judge would allow her contact with a child. When Roberto left, Daniel returned to Lucas's room. The boy was awake, staring at the ceiling. He turned when he heard his father enter. I couldn't sleep properly, Lucas admitted. I keep thinking she's going to show up here. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. She won't. I promise. How can you be sure? Because I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure of that. Daniel held his son's hand. I talked to my lawyer. We're going to get an order to keep her away from you. And we're going to move. To a new place. Where you can feel safe. Lucas processed the information in silence. Then he asked, in a voice so small it broke Daniel's heart, "What if the judge doesn't believe me?" "They will believe you." Daniel touched his son's face tenderly. "Because you'll tell the truth. And the truth has power, Lucas. It always does." But Daniel knew it wasn't that simple. He knew the system was flawed. That cases like this could drag on for months. That Helena had resources, connections, expensive lawyers. She wouldn't give up without a fight. That was why he needed something more. Something definitive. He picked up his phone and began reviewing everything. Every text message exchanged with Helena over the past few months. Every email. He looked for patterns. Contradictions. Anything he could use. And then he found it. A message exchange from 3 weeks earlier. Helena complaining that Lucas had broken an expensive vase. Daniel had replied saying he was just a child, that accidents happen. Her response had been cold. He needs to learn that actions have consequences. At the time, it had seemed like just a mother trying to teach discipline. Now, it took on a sinister meaning. He kept searching. Found more. Much more. Constant complaints about Lucas. Always portraying the boy as problematic. Disobedient. Difficult. Building a narrative in which she was the victim. The stepmother who tried, but the child simply wouldn't cooperate. Daniel realized what she had been doing. Preparing the ground. In case anyone questioned her. In case marks were seen. She already had the story ready. The boy was impossible. She tried. But sometimes lost her patience. Anyone would. But now he saw through the mask. A nurse came in to check Lucas's vital signs. The boy was already asleep again. Daniel took the opportunity to step out and make more calls. First to Lucas's school principal. Then to the pediatrician who had followed the boy since he was a baby. Then to the parents of classmates. Each conversation revealed more pieces of the puzzle. The principal mentioned that Lucas had changed drastically in the past year. He isolated himself during recess. His grades dropped. The pediatrician said that Helena always insisted on being present at appointments, answering questions on Lucas's behalf. A classmate's mother said the boy had declined an invitation to a birthday party, seeming frightened by the idea. Signs. All of them. Screaming for help. And Daniel had ignored every single one. But not anymore. He returned to the room and looked at Lucas sleeping. So small. So fragile. So hurt. He took a notebook from his bag and began to write. A timeline. Every incident he could remember. Every change in Lucas's behavior. Every time Helena had a convenient explanation. Every moment his instinct screamed that something was wrong, but he ignored it. He would be meticulous. He would be relentless. He would be everything he hadn't been when his son needed him. Helena thought she had one. That she had control. That she could keep hiding behind her perfect mask. But she was wrong. Daniel Carvalho had not built an empire by being passive. He had gotten where he was by being strategic. Patient. Determined. And now he would use every resource, every connection, every cent he had to ensure that Helena paid. To ensure that Lucas was safe. The war had only just begun. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Daniel woke up early, helped Lucas put on clean clothes that Roberto had brought, and held his son's trembling hand during the entire drive to the courthouse. The boy was pale, his eyes fixed on the car window. "It's going to be okay," Daniel repeated for the 5th time, more to himself than to Lucas. Helena was already there when they arrived. Sitting with her lawyers, wearing a discreet and elegant dress, her hair pulled back into a perfect bun. She looked like a successful executive. Confident. Innocent. When she saw Lucas, she put on a sad smile, as if she were hurt to be there. Daniel felt bile rise in his throat. The judge entered. A man around 60 years old, gray hair, stern expression. He called the case. The prosecutor assigned by Child Protective Services presented the medical evidence first. Photos of the marks on Lucas's body. Detailed reports. The hypothermia report. Each image projected on the screen was a stab in Daniel's heart. Helena remained impassive. Her lawyers argued that the marks could have other explanations. That children get hurt while playing. That the rain incident was a misunderstanding. "My client is a devoted stepmother," said her lawyer, a man in an impeccable suit, who has done her best to build a connection with a child who naturally resists her presence after the loss of his biological mother. Daniel clenched his fists. The audacity. The complete lack of shame. Then it was Lucas's turn. The boy was called to testify. Daniel saw the small body stiffen in the chair. The judge was gentle, explaining that Lucas only needed to tell the truth, that no one there was going to hurt him. Lucas looked at his father. Daniel nodded, encouraging him. And then the boy began to speak. He told about the times Helena locked him in the dark room as punishment. About how she burned his skin with the tip of a cigarette when he spilled something. About the yelling. The insults. The constant threats that everything would get worse if he told his father. Lucas's voice was low at first. Hesitant. But as he continued, it grew firmer. As if each word released a weight he had carried for far too long. "She said my dad wouldn't believe me," Lucas whispered, tears streaming down his face. "She said I was the problem. That nobody would want me if I kept being so difficult." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even Helena's lawyers had stopped taking notes. The judge looked at Helena. "Do you have anything to say?" She stood up. And for the first time, the mask slipped. Just for a second. A flash of cold rage in her eyes before she recomposed her expression. "That boy is manipulative," she said, her voice controlled but with a sharp edge. "He always has been. Ever since I entered that house, he did everything to sabotage me. To destroy my marriage to Daniel." Daniel stood up, but Roberto grabbed his arm, making him sit back down. Helena continued, her voice rising a notch. "I tried. God knows I tried. But he tested me constantly. Disobeyed on purpose. Broke things. Caused problems. And when I set limits, he ran to his father with little stories." "Little stories," the judge repeated the word slowly. "Do you consider severe hypothermia and documented cigarette burns mere little stories?" Helena opened her mouth. Closed it. For the first time, she had no answer. That was when Roberto stood up. "Your Honor, we would like to present additional evidence." He placed a tablet on the desk. "We obtained access to the security cameras of the residence from the past 6 months. With Mr. Carvalho's authorization, of course." Daniel's heart raced. He didn't know about this. Roberto hadn't mentioned that he had obtained the footage. The video began to play on the large screen. It was from the previous week. Lucas was in the kitchen, trying to reach a glass in a high cabinet. The glass slipped, fell, shattered on the floor. The boy immediately began to gather the shards, clearly terrified. Helena entered. The camera captured everything. The shouting. How she grabbed Lucas by the arm forcefully, leaving red marks. How she dragged him into the backyard and locked him outside, regardless of him crying, begging. Another video. Lucas forgetting his backpack in the living room. Helena picking up a cigarette, calling the boy, pressing the lit tip against his arm while saying, "Maybe this way you'll learn to remember things." Another. And another. And another. 6 months of abuse. All recorded. All documented. Daniel couldn't breathe. He didn't know the internal cameras were active. He had installed them only for security, but never checked the recordings. He never imagined he would need to. Helena was white. Her lawyers whispered furiously among themselves. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. The judge turned off the screen. His face was red with contained anger. "I've seen enough." He struck the gavel. Restraining order approved. The woman is prohibited from any contact with the child. Full custody granted to the father. The public prosecutor's office will have 72 hours to file formal criminal charges. He turned to Helena. And ma'am, I strongly suggest you get a good criminal lawyer. Because I guarantee you're going to need one. Helena tried to protest, but the security guards were already approaching. She was escorted out, still trying to maintain her composure, but everyone could see the truth now. The mask had completely fallen. Daniel pulled Lucas into an embrace. The boy was crying, but this time it was different. It was relief. It was freedom. It's over, Daniel whispered against his son's hair. It's really over now. Roberto placed a hand on his shoulder. The cameras saved you. She has no way to deny anything anymore. Outside the courthouse, journalists were waiting. The news had already leaked. Billionaire exposes stepmother's abuse against son. Cameras clicked frantically. Daniel shielded Lucas from the flashes, guiding him to the car. He didn't care about the publicity. He didn't care about the scandal this would cause in social circles. He cared only that his son was safe. Finally, truly safe. Inside the car, Lucas looked at him. Is she going to prison? Yes. Daniel didn't soften the truth. She's going to pay for what she did to you. Lucas nodded slowly. Then, for the first time in months, Daniel saw something he thought he had lost forever. His son smiled. It was a small smile. Fragile. Still carrying pain and fear. But it was real. And it was a beginning. 6 months later, Daniel was sitting in the bleachers of a soccer field, watching Lucas run after the ball with other boys. The afternoon sun painted everything in gold. The sound of children's laughter filled the air. Lucas scored a goal. He immediately turned, looking for his father. When their eyes met, the boy waved, a huge smile on his face. Daniel waved back, feeling his chest tighten with emotion. 6 months. Half a year since that horrible day that changed everything. Recovery was not easy. Nor fast. Lucas began therapy 3 times a week with a psychologist specialized in childhood trauma. The first sessions were brutal. The boy could barely speak. He would sit in silence, hugging a teddy bear, his eyes distant. But Dr. Carla had infinite patience. She used drawings, games. She let Lucas process everything at his own pace. And little by little, slowly, the boy began to open up. To talk about his fears. About the nightmares that still woke him up sweating in the middle of the night. Daniel changed everything too. He sold the mansion. He could no longer look at those walls without seeing his son soaked and trembling on the sofa. They bought a smaller, cozier house, in a quiet neighborhood with other families. A place where Lucas could have friends. Where he could be just a child. And Daniel completely changed his routine. He drastically reduced business trips. Delegated more responsibilities. Started working from home 3 days a week. Every morning he personally took Lucas to school. Every afternoon he was there to pick him up. At first, he felt guilty about it. About needing something so terrible to happen to realize what truly mattered. But Dr. Carla helped him understand that carrying guilt forever would help no one. What mattered was what he did now. The choices he made from that point on. Helena was sentenced to 4 years in prison for child abuse, bodily harm, and neglect. She lost all rights. She was permanently prohibited from contact with minors. The trial was widely publicized. Her reputation completely destroyed. Daniel felt no satisfaction from it. He felt nothing, actually. Helena had become irrelevant. A page turned. The focus was entirely on Lucas now. The boy still had difficult days. Days when he was too quiet. Days when any loud sound made him jump in fear. Days when he didn't want to go to school because he was afraid his father wouldn't be there when he came back. On those days, Daniel canceled everything. He stayed home. They watched movies together. Cooked pancakes for dinner. Talked about small and big things. About feelings. About fears. About hopes. And little by little, the good days began to outnumber the bad ones. Lucas made friends. Real friends. Boys who invited him to sleep over. Who laughed with him during recess. Who included him without pity, without treating him like a victim, just like one of them. His grades improved. He started eating properly again. Sleeping better. Color returned to his cheeks. The sparkle returned to his eyes. And most importantly, he began to trust again. Not completely. There was still a long road ahead. But Lucas now believed he could tell his father things. That he could ask for help when he needed it. That he wouldn't be punished for honest mistakes. The game ended. Lucas ran to Daniel, sweaty and happy. "Did you see, Dad? I scored 2 goals." "I sure did. You're becoming a star." Daniel ruffled his son's hair affectionately. On the way home, Lucas talked excitedly about the game, about his friends, about the snack he wanted to stop and get. Normal things. Things a 7-year-old child should be thinking about. They stopped at a diner. Sat in a corner, ordering burgers and milkshakes. Lucas was talking about a science project at school when he stopped in the middle of the sentence. "Dad." "Yes." "Thank you," the boy said, suddenly serious. "For believing in me. For saving me." Daniel felt tears burn in his eyes. He held his son's small hand on the table. "You don't need to thank me for that, Lucas. Protecting you is my job. My responsibility. And my greatest joy." "I know." Lucas gave a tiny smile. "But still, thank you." They returned home when it was already getting dark. Daniel helped Lucas with his homework, then read him a story in bed. The boy fought sleep, his eyes closing and opening heavily. "Dad, will you be here when I wake up?" he asked, as he always did. "I'll be here." Daniel answered, as he always answered. "I promise." Lucas finally relaxed, falling asleep safely. Daniel stayed there for a few more minutes, just watching. Thinking about how close he had come to losing this. To losing him. Thinking about all the children who had no one to believe them. To save them. He left the room quietly and picked up his laptop. He had made a decision a few weeks earlier. It was time to put it into action. He opened the document he had been working on. A project. A foundation dedicated to combating child abuse. To training teachers and doctors to identify warning signs. To providing legal resources for families who couldn't afford lawyers. To giving a voice to children who, like Lucas, were afraid to speak. He would use his fortune. His connections. His experience. He would turn his son's pain into purpose. Into real change for other children. Because he had learned the most important lesson of all: money, success, power. None of it meant absolutely anything if you failed to protect those who needed you most. And he would never fail at that again. Not with Lucas. Not with any child he could help. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment saying what you thought and where you're watching from. Your interaction helps spread this important message to more people. The journey of healing continued. For Lucas. For Daniel. For both of them. But now, for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. And it was